Welcome to Winning with the Burns, a podcast for highly ambitious people who have a burning desire to learn what it takes to win at a high level. Hey guys, thanks for joining us again. You know, today is a very special day because I've got a really good friend of mine, one of the most incredible, most unique human beings I really have personally met and had the privilege to spend a lot of time with. So today we got Mr. Tripp Amos with us.
Thank you, man.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for coming up and joining us today.
You bet.
You know, so a lot of people will hear the name Amos, right? And it's like, hey, I know that name from somewhere. Where would they have heard that name?
First of all, famous Amos cookies, right? That's going to be the first place that people ask about, right? But once they figure out that that was founded in Hawaii, that's not us. And so the Amos family, we moved to Columbus, Georgia in the mid-'50s to start a company called Aflac.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, you know, when the company was started, Aflac, you know, we've heard so many stories, and you shared several unique ones with me, right? But Aflac almost wasn't the name Aflac.
It was not founded as Aflac, right? So Aflac, for those that don't know, stands for, it's an acronym, right? It stands for American Family Life Assurance Company. That's what it stands for. Most people, that's a mouthful, which is why you go with the acronym. But we were actually founded as American Family Life Insurance Company. The assurance came later. That's the story you're referring to. So, but that's what we were founded as, because obviously we were, you know, an American family trying to start a life insurance company. We were actually started as a debit life insurance company, which, you know, is way in the past now, right? For us, I mean, we're majorly, you know, voluntary benefits and payroll deduction, but, you know, the name fit when we were founded.
Awesome. So the name Aflac used to be American Family Life Insurance.
Right. Aflac.
Aflac, right?
Sure. Why not? We didn't use that, but Aflac would be what it was. Yes.
Yeah. So how did you change it, or what made you change that?
Sure. So by force. There's actually a company called American Family Life of Wisconsin, still to this day. And for those that don't know, insurance is regulated by the states. And so we were kind of marching westward from Georgia. They were moving southward from Wisconsin. We arrived the same week in Louisiana. And so the insurance commissioner, you know, refused to have two companies with the same name. So on a literal coin flip, that's not a myth, we lost the coin toss, and the loser had to change their name from insurance to assurance. So we went home, had to change the logo, the letterhead, everything else. You can imagine that was probably not the greatest week in the company's history, but, you know, turning lemon into lemonades 3 decades later, we got to have an Aflac duck because of the coin toss and actually losing, right? Sometimes when you lose, right, it's a blessing in disguise.
That's right.
Many times later.
Yeah, it don't happen to you, it happens for you.
That's right. And so because we lost it, we had to change our name from Aflac to Aflac, and in the year 2000, the duck debuted. Probably
one of the most recognizable brand and marketing employee out there that people recognize. Like when they see the duck, they think Aflac.
Absolutely. And you know, what people don't realize is, so that happened in 2000. That's when the duck, I mean, you think about it, the duck is now 22, almost 23 years old. Right. So there is literally a generation of Americans that don't know, you know, the world without the duck. But before the duck came out, every insurance company commercial was kissing babies and sunsets and deers in the woods. It was serious, right? The Rock. Right. Mm-hmm. And we were the first ones to kind of say, you know what, we're going to take insurance, which is a serious business, right, in terms of what we do and what we cover, but having the ability to have humor at our name. But there was no Geico Gecko. There was no Lemu Emu, right? All that became possible after the success of the duck.
Well, you kind of blazed the trail and set the tone, you know, for people to recognize the name. Right. And if I'm not mistaken, you told me one story one time that the marketing team was trying to come up with the rebranding, and I think they were stumped. They didn't know what to do. I think they broke for lunch.
Yep. Now, so that was...
I'm going to mess that story up, so that's why I'm going to let you do it.
You're good. So that's the marketing agency, right? Everybody's like, well, you know, which family member or who at Aflac came up with the duck? The answer is no one at Aflac came up with the duck. That's why you have marketing and advertising agencies in New York. And so we were talking with an agency in New York, of course, across from Central Park. And so they were kind of stumped, like you said, and went across to Central Park and just said, look, we're going to take a break. But obviously, Aflac's in their mind, it's in their head, and a duck comes out of the Central Park pond, quacks at him, and they were like, "Dadgum, it sounds like that duck's at Aflac." and they went and wrote the script, flew down, won the account. And if you don't know, the first commercial is actually called The Pond. And it is a duck coming out of a pond and coming up to two guys on a park bench, right? And that's where the duck came from.
I love that story because, you know, that's by accident genius happens. Right?
Yep.
It was like you had I had everything prepared, We had all these ideas, but by accident.
Listen, in almost everything, a lucky break is a term for a reason.
Yeah.
Right? There are a lot of talented musicians out there. There are a lot of talented actors out there. There are a lot of talented, companies out there, but lucky breaks are part of life.
We talk about a lucky break also. Y'all had a big break, and that was by accident going over to Japan, going out and visiting Japan. I want to hear that story.
But I want to know what's your lineage?
What's my lineage?
What's your lineage with the Aflac?
Sure. So there were three primary founders. There were three brothers, Bill, John, and Paul Amos, and they founded the insurance company. We had never gotten into insurance before. My granddad and my Uncle Paul were both dime store guys. They owned Ben Franklin dime stores in the same town of 5,000 people. So they competed like y'all are brothers. Imagine if you two had competing stores in LaGrange, Georgia, right? What Christmas
I would
is
win,
kinda,
just so you know.
I'll let y'all deal with that one later. And then my Uncle Bev, John Amos, was the assistant district attorney in Fort Walton Beach, Florida. Now, this is when Fort Walton Beach was a sleepy fishing village.
Yeah.
It wasn't, a vacation mecca. And so there was no insurance background in the family. And so, but long story short on that, we decided we were going to start an insurance company. And so we moved to Columbus, Georgia to do so. There are a couple of reasons why Columbus, Georgia. Let me tell you that. I'll give you three reasons. Number one, you have to have a certain amount of money to capitalize an insurance company. And Georgia required less than Florida. So let's go to Georgia. Now we're in Georgia. Well, Columbus was the largest city in Georgia at that time that did not have an insurance company headquartered there. Because back then it was all debit life. There were no computers or internet. So Macon had its own little insurance company. Augusta had its own little insurance, obviously Atlanta. And so we looked at Columbus. And then the kicker was Fort Benning. So one of the things you needed back then, again, before automation, is you needed a lot of clerical, but yet disciplined labor. And we founded an Army Wives.
Wow.
And so they could come in, think about it. They were disciplined, right? They were a military family. They were disciplined. They were hardworking. They didn't need benefits. They got it through their husband at that time period. They didn't need a career track because in 3 years, their husband's going to be transferred somewhere anyway. So it was the best, cheapest form of disciplined labor we could find. And still to this day, we have so many, Fort Benning wives and now husbands that work at Aflac.
So they decided to start the company.
Yeah. So the lineage side, I guess you had asked, right? So I am the grandson, right? That is a grandson, right? There's a lot of, there's Bill, John, and Paul. And so everybody comes from one of those three branches, I guess I should say. I am the Bill branch. Y'all keep calling me Tripp, which is awesome. So the reason I'm Tripp is I'm actually Bill Amos III. Okay. And so I'm the triple, and so that's where the name Tripp comes from in terms of the sobriquet, the nickname. But, I tell you about, there are 13 of me. There are 13 third generation grandkids of the founders. And, over half of us still live in Columbus.
I remember, I had a guy tell me one time, he said he was raised in Columbus, and he remembers an Aflac gentleman coming to the door, not to collect money for insurance, but raising money for the capital.
We didn't have the money to start the company. Yeah. Before we sold insurance, we sold stock.
And he said his grandfather kicked himself
for not
because it was like $500, and $500 back then was like a lot of money. But what that $500 would have turned into.
Right. I just, there are stories out there, we made a lot of South Georgia farmers rich. That's really who stepped up, is the farmers. The farmers throughout South Georgia were basically those were our earliest investors.
And it was initially life insurance.
Initially debit life. That's what everything was back then, right? You didn't have accident insurance or even disability insurance. I mean, we're talking 1955.
So it was all life. What was the next step? Was it?
So the next step was we basically failed. That's the next step, right? So again, right, blessings that are there. So my great-grandfather, so the father of the three founders, my great-grandfather, John Shelby, got cancer. And so as an Amos family collectively, we got to see up front what that can do to a family's finances, depleting savings. We're trying to start a business. We're trying, dealing with the patriarch and paying that. And so we decided to come up with the world's first ever cancer expense policy. And that was the differentiator for us. no one else had it. And so that was really the second part of our growth, was introducing cancer insurance, literally state by state. We weren't even in all states yet, that kind of thing, much less to other countries.
Wow.
But again, the blessing, kind of like we were talking about the Aflac Duck, obviously cancer is an amazingly terrible thing. I just went through it with my father. But without my great-grandfather going through that and us seeing it firsthand, right? How many people, and literally millions of people now, that have benefited through our cancer expense, ours and other carriers.
Yeah.
But who came up with it was Aflac.
That's so cool, because in anything there's sequences along the way, and you had three brothers decided to start an insurance company. And then, we're not even in the full story yet. We ain't got to Japan.
No, we're
right?
we're 2 years in. Right. 1958 was cancer. Yeah.
Yeah, 2 years in. And but again, it started with a dream.
Yep.
And it started with them making a decision to do it. And I really feel like that's the deal. It really is. It's if you got something inside of you.
And you think about this as well. So most people, when they see pictures of the three founders, right? They're old gentlemen, they're bald or gray, or they're still sexy as hell because they're related to me. But they were, the pictures you see, they're in their 60s and 70s or 50s or whatever. You got to remember, these guys were 31, 33, and 35 when they started the company. They had young children, right? When you say they took a dream, they took a risk. And they moved their family with young children to a town they have never lived in before to start a company. And but people look at them in the pictures and think, success was guaranteed.
Got lucky, yeah.
They got the gray around the temples, they're good to go.
Yeah.
And it's just not true, right? I mean, nowadays we're used to, in the internet age, young people starting companies and being uber successful. That was not how it worked in the 50s. 31-year-olds didn't start insurance companies, right? And it just worked. They had great discipline of labor. John Amos was the visionary. It was his idea. He was the larger than life guy. My grandfather was the oldest brother. He was the miser. He was the one who watched the purse strings, made sure that we didn't run out of money, all that stuff. And then Uncle Paul, the youngest brother, he was the marketer. He's the sales guy. So they all had their lanes, right? When you're working with family, I'm sure you two are the same way, right? You know your strengths, you know your lanes, and so it just worked.
Yeah. So they start doing cancer insurance.
Mm-hmm.
That takes off, right?
It takes off.
All right. So tell us a story about Japan.
So Japan, we'll fast forward now 20 years.
Okay.
So 1972, for those of you who are older in years, we used to have these things called World's Fairs, right? And so the last one, I remember going to one in Knoxville, Tennessee when I was like 12 years old. But in 1972, Osaka held the World's Fair. And there used to be an airline called Pan Am.
Yeah.
Okay, it was the world's airline. So one of our board members was also on the board of Pan Am Airways, and he was a widower. And so Pan Am, being the world airline, held their board of directors meeting where? At the World's Fair. And so he asked my uncle, John Amos, to attend with him, right, since he was a widower.
The visionary.
The visionary, right. That is correct. And so it's going to be a little freaky, in this day and age, what I'm getting ready to say. He went over there, and that was the first time Amos had ever been to Japan. And what he noticed was, if you have a cold, if you have a flu in Japan, even back then, you wore a mask.
Yeah.
You wore a mask to the grocery store or out or whatever. That is just their culture. And his view was, as a Southern dude, was basically, well, they'll buy any health insurance I throw at them if they're health conscious, right? Yeah. And so in 1974, we were the first foreign company licensed to do business in Japan post World War II. And the really what the secret of success was, right, was the initiative, because we got to be there first. And so Japan, y'all have to understand, the U.S. has about 2,100 insurance companies, right, for a population of 330 million. Japan has half our population and 28 insurance companies. They are monsters, right? Huge. Nippon Life, those kind of things, Sumitomo Life. And so if we had gone over there, we were going to get crushed. And so the Japanese government actually stepped in. Imagine the U.S. government doing this. Two things. Number one, they granted us an 8-year monopoly in Japan. We were the only company that could sell cancer insurance in Japan. 8-year monopoly.
Wow.
And number two, we know distribution is king in insurance, right? Yeah. It's about producers. It's about average weekly producers. And they were like, well, how are you going to distribute your product? We're like, I don't know. And they're like, well, tell us how you'd like to do it. And so the way we sell in Japan is still illegal in the U.S., but when in Rome, right? Do as the Romans do. So we sell on a form of rebating. To give a U.S. example, it'd be like us going to Coca-Cola Company saying, we'd like to offer employee benefits to your people. So we need you to create the Coca-Cola Insurance Agency, and you are the broker for your employees, and they get the broker cut. And so imagine, do they want us in there seeing everybody? Do we get good enrollment conditions? Do we get extra products in there? Of course we do, because Sumitomo Insurance Agency gets a cut of every Sumitomo employee that we do. They're incentivized. Yeah. And so you fast forward, right? We now have 94% of Tokyo Stock Exchange listed companies as clients in Japan, right? We insure 1 out of every 4 Japanese citizens. We make more money in Japan than any other non-Japanese company except for Coke.
So you said this earlier, 2/3 of Aflac's business is in Japan.
2/3 of that, and that, truthfully about 72%
wow.
of our, you can go by premium, by earnings, whatever. Invested assets, roughly about 70 to 75% is based in Japan.
And there's a story behind getting picked to have the monopoly, right?
Well, so we got picked because, we took the initiative. That's one. And I think in the beginning, what I'd tell you is Japan, they originally wanted to pick somebody. It was under trade negotiations, right? As you know, our market was open to them. They were a closed financial market. And so they felt the pressure to open their financial markets. And I don't think they wanted to let in one of the U.S. big boys. So they let in They
went down the list.
They went and found the most small, redneck, backwoods company they could find. But what we did have is we filled a need. Right. That's a lot about business, right? I tell people, if you can do the 2 things you can do to succeed in business: tell a story, fill a need.
Yeah.
You do those 2 things, you'll be fine. And, MetLife didn't have cancer insurance, right? We had that. And so in Japan, for those that don't know, that is by far the largest killer, right? They don't have heart disease like we do. Right. I mean, they don't
eat like crap.
Look at right. Yeah. They don't eat McDonald's go look at a picture of, they're slim, they're fit, but they smoke like chimneys. Right. And so cancer is by far the leading cause of death in Japan. And so we filled a need that perhaps at that point, they could have let in a New York Life or a MetLife or one of these large companies even back then, but they didn't fill the need. Right. Everything that those companies were selling, Nippon Life already sold. Mm-hmm. So again, just that invention of the cancer insurance and being that differentiator not only helped us here domestically, but, moving into Japan.
So, when we first met you, dynamic personality, sharp, you know what you're talking about.
Tell my wife all these things.
All right. Okay. But you grew up, your parents had a little money growing up, right?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
But a lot of times when that happens, the kids don't do anything. They, if they inherit money, they don't really do a whole lot, right?
Sure.
You're different, right? What's your story? You went to high school.
I went to high school, and you're right. I mean, obviously I grew up very blessed, right? I mean, I went to the private school in Columbus and went to, Furman University, Emory University. I'm just saying in my education, money wasn't a hindrance to getting the best education.
Yeah.
Right. But I'd had ambition.
But anybody can get an education in today's time.
But the ambition, listen, I started at Aflac when I was 15 years old doing summer jobs. Right. It was expected of me my Uncle John Amos, right? By the time I was 15 years old, my granddad was the oldest brother, if you remember, and he had already retired. He retired in 1978. So I was 8 years old when my granddad retired. And so John Amos is really the one that took interest in me, right? And he would take me on Aflac trips, and he's the one who, he'd call the principal's office at Brookstone and say, I need Tripp over here. And so I'd get out of school and go over there because he was signing some important document and wanted me to be there. He's really the one who fed my desire to be a part of Aflac.
Well, I think probably because he saw something in you.
I hope so, right? And so I've wanted to achieve, right? I don't understand people that don't have that ambition gene, right? That just kind of gets me because you blessings flow from ambition, right? I mean, it really does, and it's just, you say, what's my story? I can tell you this. I'll give you a little bit of my story is when I was 9 years old, I got a hip disease. And so I had to wear leg braces for 3 years, 9, 10, and 11 years old. Think how cruel kids are at 9, 10, 11 years old.
Oh, yeah,
and I had on like the leg braces that like Forrest Gump had on, if you remember when he was running and they like broke off of him. And I don't know why, but I can tell you that was a defining moment for me because it first of all, it made me realize things can happen to me. Right? You grow up when you're 17, 18 years old, especially as a young man, you think I'm bulletproof, nothing's going to happen to me. I never had that feeling. I always had the feeling something can happen to me if I don't work hard and, achieve. And I will tell you that 3 years of having those leg braces, I mean, both legs, and I think that is really and truly what humbled me. Right? Because again, a lot of kids, that are privileged, right, can grow up jackasses.
Yeah.
I mean,
Sure, yeah.
And I was humbled real quickly and real early.
But it could have gave you a big insecurity at that
I
age.
get that. I get that. And listen, I had an amazing mom. I have an amazing dad, and they were great through it all. My grandparents. So obviously, I mean, everybody being in Columbus, but I always wanted to achieve. My dad didn't do the Aflac thing as much. He was a doctor, right? But both of my grandfathers were in Aflac. And so I wanted to make my grandparent, more so than my dad. That's weird, but I wanted to make my two grandfathers proud, right? And I'm very blessed. So, most people just, the grandparents passed away early, but, I didn't lose either one of my granddads until I was 27 years old. So I got to know both of my granddads, not as the guy who gave me money and candy, but I got to know them as a man.
Yeah, as an adult.
As an adult, right? And that was one of the...
And a great uncle.
Huh?
And a great uncle.
Yeah. I mean, so I do. It's just my two granddads were amazing influences in my life. One of them was on the sales side. One of them was president. And so I learned the sales and the field and the distribution side of Aflac from one grandfather. And I learned the headquarters and, everything that goes along with that, right? Underwriting and regulatory and budget and everything like that from the other. And it was just a good balance for me.
So you went to school, went to Furman?
Went to Furman, FU, yes.
Okay. And graduated from school. And then what was the next move after that?
So in school, I tell you what, I did a couple of things. I did 3 foreign studies. If there's anybody listening to this daggum thing that's still in college, go away, do something, right? I did as you can imagine, I did 6 months in Japan, right? Took 3 years of the Japanese language. I did a stint in the Netherlands and a stint at London School of Economics. Go see the world, right? Learn the world. And then literally I went to graduate school at Emory, graduated in May, started with Aflac in June. And that was 1994.
So did you start out selling?
No, I actually started in Aflac International.
Okay.
Right. We had moved on into other countries at that point. And so for the first year and a half, I did Aflac International because my thing is I told my family, look, if I'm going to go to Japan or if I'm going to go to Taiwan or if I'm going to go to international, can I get that over with before we have kids? Right. I wanted the international experience because once my wife, Jennifer, and I, once we started having kids, going to Iowa is one thing, going to Tokyo's a different thing when you have a 2-year-old.
That's right.
Right. And so my thing was I wanted to get kind of that international experience out of the way, but underway early so that, when I decided we're going to be parents, that I could focus on the U.S. So I started in Aflac International, did that for 2 years. My first child was born in 96, and by 96, I was U.S. only. That was the plan.
So after that, what'd you do after that?
Aflac-wise?
Yeah.
So my path, I ran the strategic planning unit, which was everything from market research to competitive intelligence to mergers and acquisition analysis, stuff like that. So I ran strategic planning. From there, I ran what was called field force development, which is today it's called producer growth, but it is all the recruiting and training programs right throughout the country that are used to build we got about 32,000 licensed agents right now. Right, with Aflac. And so my job at that point was leading the recruiting and development, the training development, all the programs that go with that. And then I got more into the sales side. I ran what was called the East. So I ran the Eastern U.S., which was 10 states. So I had everything from the Carolinas to Virginia, West Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, all that area. So I ran that. And then at that point, back to the kids, right? Because I'm a big believer in family. Is my kids were 4 and 7, running 10 states. You know how often you're home? Not much. And so my cousin retired from Georgia, and named John Beck. He retired from running Georgia, and Georgia had never been outside the family. So there had been 3 people that had run Georgia from 1955 to 2005. And I got a call one night from our CEO, Dan Amos, and he was like, okay, JB's retiring. Do you want to step down and take Georgia? And, it is so counterintuitive to go down the ladder, right? From running 10 states to running 1 state. But again, my cousin, who is older and wiser than me, was correct. And so we went back and forth for a week. I'd wake up one morning and say, yes, I'm going to take Georgia. It's a step down. It's kind of counterintuitive, but it's the best thing for my family. I'd wake up the next morning. This is BS. Yeah. Why would I do this?
Yeah.
I've got 10 guys that are running great operations, and why would I abandon them? And I had those emotions. And I literally took those 10 guys and gals down to Orlando, took them to Disney World for the day, then did a day of meetings. And then at like 4 o'clock that afternoon in the meetings, I said, give me 10 minutes. And so I stepped out. I called Dan. I said, I'm in. I'll take Georgia. And I walked back in, and I'll even tear up now. But I walked in. First thing I said was, what I'm about to say is not a joke. I'm leaving y'all, and I'm going to take Georgia. And with that, I ran Georgia for 13 years.
And that's where you and I met a few years ago. You stopped by in LaGrange. You're like, hey, I just want to meet you guys.
Yeah. And it was absolutely the right move. Doesn't mean you can't go back up the ladder later.
Yeah.
Right. But I got to be at dance recitals. I got to be at football games. I got to be, the basketball coach for my daughter. I got to be the Boy Scout leader for my son. Right. And all that stuff that you only do that once.
But you were able to do a lot of student ministry too, because that is one of your passions as well.
I did. I love students. Listen, do not give me a kid from birth to 13. Once they turn 13, give them to me. I can take care of God. I don't know why God decided, Tripp, you need to understand how to deal with teenagers. And so my wife and I both have been involved in youth ministry for lots of years, did it through with my kids. And, we still do it today. Right. And my kids, frankly, are in their 20s. And so they're doing it. But yeah, everybody has their strengths, but don't put me in the church nursery. God bless. But put me on Sunday night youth, and we're going to have some fun.
Because, but that would not have taken place had you had the 10 states.
No, I would not have had the ability.
You wouldn't have been able to plant the seeds in your children to be able to carry that on.
Totally the right answer, right?
Now, and I know this is kind of off script, but
we have a script.
Well, this is kind of off subject, but you for spring break, you did something very unique for spring break for your students, didn't you?
I did for a number of years. So, in an attempt to keep them out of Panama City. My wife and I would take, St. Luke United Methodist Church in Columbus, we taught the seniors, the 12th graders. And so we did that for a number of years. And so every spring break, we'd take them on a cruise. And we'd do, Belize and Caymans or wherever the cruise went. And again, but it was just something we did for them. And, but we did it 4 or 5 years straight, and just great memories with that. That was my best week of the year, right? I could be 18 again, have a ball with these kids, none of their parents, right? It's just us and the kids and maybe 1 or 2 chaperones. I'd always have one like 20-something guy, one 20-something girl that would sleep in the cabins with the kids, right? I mean, we had 20 kids, right? And of course, Jennifer and I have our balcony way away from them.
On the other side of the ship, right?
That's right. And so, but God bless, it was so fun. But yeah, it was my way. And Jennifer and I were like, look, these kids, we don't want them going to Panama City, right? Because we all know what happens in Panama City. So, it was great.
Keep them out of trouble.
Yep. That was our thing.
Matter of fact, you're still have relationships with a lot of those kids. Like you're leaving this week, and you got one that's graduating from seminary.
So when I was saying we have those 20-somethings that stayed in the cabins, this is Big Mick Miller. And so, but he did it 3 years with us, and he went and stayed with the boys and stayed in the cabin with them, and he was the one that had to stay out till 3 a.m. with them, and so he graduates from seminary in Fort Worth on Friday morning, and heck yeah, I'm going to fly out there. I know
you're proud.
I am. I'm very proud of that young man.
But see, that's planting seeds in people, fertilizing it, letting God take it to where it goes, because you wouldn't have that opportunity had you been, I don't want to say selfish, at the time, but you looked at the bigger picture. You had good mentorship around you. You had good people you could listen to that says, this is a good idea for you to do this.
Yes. And for me, I recognized I had a gift or an ability. And that ability is I can communicate with teenagers. I don't know why that's what I have, but I tell people, you give me a 15-year-old, I can get a meeting out of the palm of my hand, right? Cars don't hurt.
Yeah, that's true, right?
Right. When you have cool cars, that doesn't hurt if you're currying favor with 15-year-old boys. But it just, it fit, and I enjoy doing it. Right. I'll give you one more example is when COVID hit, the high school boys used to meet at St. Luke. And when COVID hit, they wouldn't let them meet indoors. And so the youth pastor guy at that point, Jonathan Moore, great friend of mine, he called me up, and, Jennifer and I at our house, we have a big fire pit area and everything like that. And so we decided, okay, well, if we can't meet indoors, we're going to do the high school boys Bible study outside, at the fire pit. And y'all know boys and fire, right? So one of my sayings used to be safety third, right? Not safety first, safety third, because when it comes to boys, right? Fire and women, no safety. Right? It's women, there's fire, there's safety, right? Safety third used to be my battle cry when I was a Boy Scout leader. And so we talked about girls and we sat around a fire, right? And so, but we did that, and that it was going to be for just a little bit, 2 weeks to flatten the curve or 2 months to flatten the curve.
That's right.
And years later, they're still meeting at the fire pit, whether I'm there or not.
That's really cool.
Right?
That is really
And so
cool.
they love it there. They love it. And my wife, she's she's an amazing lady, her love language is boys eat, right? She fixes their dinner for them, and she scours cookbooks for things that are kind of exotic, but still that the boys will want. That's loaded with meat and cheese and potatoes and everything like that. So she gets that's how she serves on that side.
Well, now you get to mentor a son-in-law.
I do.
You get to mentor Raymond, right?
Raymond.
So let's talk also, because this kind of ties in to some things we're going to talk about here in a minute, but
Okay.
The Raymond Project.
Yes.
You come to me, it was a while back, and you were like, hey, I've got this idea. This is what I'm about to do with my son-in-law. So let's talk about the Raymond Project.
Okay. The Raymond Project. So I, for you men out there, one day you may have a son-in-law, and so I do now. So Raymond Blair is his name, hence the Raymond Project. And so Raymond he's 22 years old, right? So let's get that out there first, right? So a lot of people don't really know what they're wanting to do and what their direction in life is going to be at that age. And so I proposed at the Waffle House, of course. My wife and I took he and my daughter to Waffle House, and I had this whole thing planned out. And I'm like, all right, here's what I need you to do. I need you to quit your job, and I want you to give me 6 months of your life. Give me 6 months from June through the end of the year, through December. And actually, we're going to shut it down at the end of November. We're 1 month ahead of schedule. And I said, I want to teach you everything I can teach you. And I want to bring in other great men that can teach you things I can't teach you. And in the end, I want you to have an understanding of how the world works. And then you figure out your path. And men have been amazing jumping in with them. I said, go hang with somebody. A lot of it was a shadowing series, right, where he would spend time with other men from a bunch of different disciplines. We do a daily devotional every day, right? I had a couple of projects for him to work on. We do a trip every month together, right? So we can build our relationship. But really the other men, so he's hung with people who, CEOs of manufacturing companies, guys who run private equity funds, insurance guys, real estate guys, politicians, right? I wanted him to just have this big breadth and then say, okay, now what do you like, right? And so as you know, right, I see that every business has 5 pillars. That's just Tripp Amos's view of the world. And so I wanted him to have a grounding in all those 5 pillars so that when he does find what he wants to do in life, I'm a very big believer in, I told him, look, like you said, I grew up blessed and so will he. And I said, look, I do not want you having a position, a career where you have to miss your daughter or your sons. I want you to be available and be present as a father and as a husband. And, if there's a 2:00 baseball game for Little League, that your boss isn't like, you can't go, right? And I want you to be able to plant the seeds early. Listen, at 22, if we can do this right, at 32, you can do whatever you want to do. And so that's our goal together. And I made him write down his 1, 3, and 5 year goals, spiritual, professional, and personal. I made him do a bucket list item. The bucket list item, you'll love this, of 10, 2 of them is people he wants to meet.
Oh, really?
Right. And then the other 8 are visit the Holy Land and all these other things. Right. But the 2 people he wants to meet, it couldn't be more different. He wants to meet President Trump, and he wants to meet the drummer from Iron Maiden.
That's a little Tripp influence on that one.
Well, so he is the drummer in the praise band at St. Luke. So I mean, that is his passion and his love, right? And he's an amazing drummer. I used to, play when I was young, and he's like 10, 20, 30x what I could ever do. But Nico McBrain, y'all have no idea who that is, but that's the drummer for Iron Maiden, and that's one of his 10 things in life.
So you're 5 months into this deal, and what's some things that he's learned? He's 22.
22.
He's 20. I didn't even start thinking different until I was about 25.
Well, you didn't, because no one our age forced you to do so,
Yeah.
right? You don't think that way. You're just, let's get out of the video game phase. And, so some of the mantras that I took through this, right, is every man is the average of their 5 best friends.
True.
Right? And I pour that into him. I'm like, listen, because some of his friends, it's video games till 3 a.m. or, doing things you shouldn't be doing, and again, I have to tell him some of the harsh realities, which is when you get married, single guy friends aren't good.
No.
Aren't good.
No.
Right? And when you become a father, not just a husband, it's not a travesty, right, that your friend group changes over time.
That's right.
But if your 5 best friends, are lazy, unambitious, smoke weed, play video games all day. I'm just generalizing, but you know what? That will be you, or at least that will be everyone's perception of you.
Yeah.
Right. And I've challenged him to find good influences in his life that are our generation, even my dad's generation. So I'll give you some experiences, right, that he's had. A friend of mine named John Anchor, he runs a company called Anchor Pack, is his company. He's a manufacturer. And so he spent a couple of days with him, but I mean, John, he just jumped into it with both feet, right? He introduced him around. He showed him how the manufacturing process worked. At one point, Anchor Pack, manufactured 90% of all bobby pins in America out of Columbus, Georgia, right? That's what he did. And so, but he's just a manufacturing guy. But one of the things, he's on a board of a local bank, and he took him to the bank board meeting. And what do you have to do at the bank board meeting? You got to go through the balance sheet, the income statement, loan approvals.
Yeah.
And he got to sit there at the board meeting and not only meet the other board members, but understand how a bank works, right? And how banking works. I mean, just
you don't know what you don't know, and
you don't.
You don't. You said it about traveling, going abroad. Being able to see something different. If there's a window and this is all you see, that's all you see. But the window gets bigger. Oh, this, right?
Right.
So. It's absolutely powerful what you've done for him.
He'd never been to Washington, D.C., right? So I took him up to D.C. I introduced him to a number of people. We did a tour of the Capitol. We did, just how does this freaking government thing work?
When y'all figure that out,
right?
let me know.
Well, let me tell you. Well, that's another podcast. But he got to meet some of the movers and shakers up there, right? And so, but understand that there is a political process. So I took him there, but he spent days with people in real estate. Some people were just residential realtors, developers, right? And commercial real estate. He sat with all three. I made him some of the tasks, right? Because you're not always meeting with other people or myself. I made him, study the real estate course, right? The real estate license course. I made him study the insurance licensing course, not to necessarily sell real estate or sell insurance, but to understand real estate and insurance, because whatever business you're in, you're going to deal with real estate and insurance. Pick the business, it's what's going to happen. Yeah. It's 2 of the 5 pillars. And so, he met with my uncle, Cecil. And, Cecil, now he's every Thursday morning, he's at Cecil's, Bible study. And that's the one he joined. And my guess is he is the youngest person by 40 years in that Bible study, right? Cecil's, 72, 73 years old, and it's all of his friends. But that's where at 22 years old, he gets up, and I would have never told you he would have gotten up at 6:30 a.m., right, 6 months ago. And so, I want him to grow spiritually. I want him to grow professionally. I want him to grow personally. This is going to be the father of my grandchildren, right? That's, the with him, right? That's what's in it for me. And I need him to be a good man.
Yeah.
And not that he wasn't beforehand, right?
But you also need him to understand the inheritance as well.
Yeah.
because you didn't want that chain.
There is a legacy piece attached, and let me say this: he has a great dad. Right. I don't want to take away from that either. Right. His dad went with us on one of the trips that we went on. Right. He and his dad have a close relationship. His dad has been amazingly wonderful about this, because here's the backstory is when I said, I want you to quit your job and come and do this for 6 months, he had to quit working for his dad. Right.
Oh, wow.
And so, he was real nervous about talking to his dad, saying, Dad, I want to leave you so I can go and hang with.
Did you share with his dad what you wanted to do?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I did.
How did his dad respond?
So his dad. So I didn't share with him. I made Raymond do it, and so I have literally a 2-page. Here's the Raymond Project. Here's how it works. And he shared it with his dad, and his dad told him, "If I were you, I wouldn't hesitate."
That's cool. Yeah.
I wouldn't hesitate.
Instead of having an ego and being like, what's he trying to do? What's he trying to control?
Right. And,
you know what I mean?
And he can always go back to working with his dad. And frankly, if he does, he'll be more knowledgeable.
That's right.
In whatever it is that they want to do together.
Absolutely.
Right. So I do want to say that, right, is that I didn't take some kid who, it doesn't have a great father figure. Ray Blair, his dad, is a great dude, and they have a lot of fun together as well. And so, I'm still the father-in-law. I'm not the father, but I love that role.
Now, you hit on 2 of the pillars. Let's talk about all the pillars that you believe, right? There's 5 pillars.
There's 5 pillars. This is just the world according to Tripp Amos, right?
That's right.
5 pillars of what?
No science. All right. So my view is I want him to be an entrepreneur. I want him to seek freedom, right? Like I said, if there's a 2:00, softball game for his daughter, I want him to have zero reason not to be there, right? Those kind of things. So I think in business, there are 5 things that you have to know and have an understanding of. I don't care what you do. You can own a Chick-fil-A. We're talking about that, right? You can own a restaurant. You can own a construction company. You can own an insurance agency, whatever it is. So here are the 5, right? You have to understand real estate. These are in no particular order. Because again, whatever business you're in, you're either buying or renting, you have an office, you have a presence, you have something. You have to understand real estate, how it works. You're either signing a lease or you're buying a building.
That's right.
Right? Real estate is in every business. Number 2 is insurance. Insurance, I don't care what you do, you're insuring the people, the property, plant, and equipment, right? Insurance is involved in every business, right? In fact, I was the stat I told you earlier, right? I always tell people, after taxes, housing, and food, insurance is the American family's 4th largest expense. Everybody. If you add up how much you're paying for your health insurance, your car insurance, your life insurance, right? Homeowners or renters, it is easily, and for most people, it's actually ahead of taxes, right? After housing and food, insurance is the 3rd largest line item for American families. And again, whatever business he wants to be in, insurance is going to be a part of it. So real estate, there's insurance, banking. Right. And that's why I wanted him to go to a bank board meeting, understand, how a deal is structured, the 2 primary documents, right? An income sheet and an income statement and a balance sheet, how to read those. Because again, whatever you do, you're going to need a loan, you're going to need capital, you're going to need liquidity, right? You're going to have a banking relationship. The 4th is kind of regulation in politics. You've got to understand how politics work. And part of that is regulation. Again, if you own a restaurant, there's regulations around that restaurant. If you own an insurance agency, the government is involved in every business. You have to understand what their role is. And then the last one is taxes. That again, no matter what business you're in, tax strategy is going to play an important role in it. And so that's kind of what I've based the Raymond Project around in the professional sense. Like I said, we have a spiritual and a personal component as well. But what we've based it on the professional side is, I need you to understand these 5 things. And if you want to open a restaurant, you do you. You want to open a construction company, you do you. You want to open a real estate empire, you do you. But I promise you, all 5 of these, if you don't have an understanding and can't carry on a conversation and have counterparts and relationships in those 5 areas, your business is less likely to be successful.
That's good.
Because you want him to be an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
You want him to be able to create his own wealth and not be rich.
Correct.
So we talked about that earlier.
We did.
About the difference between
rich and
wealth and how to accumulate the wealth.
Yep. And so, my definition has always been, right, rich, your body works for your money, right? Doctors and lawyers are rich, but if they stop suing and slicing, then, the money stops, right? Wealthy is your money works for your money. And so everybody has to go from rich to wealthy or you can't retire, right? Because sooner or later, your body doesn't work for your money. And everybody's nut is different, right? How much somebody needs to retire, this person versus that person can be vastly different, vastly different. But so you've got to have a plan. And he and I were talking yesterday. I said there are two weapons, right? One is time and one is resources. I am resource rich. I'm not time rich, right? I'm 52 now, right? He's not resource rich, but he's time rich, right? What he can accomplish in 10 years with fewer resources, right, is going to be better than what I can do with my resources with fewer time. And so I'm just trying to help him understand how to acquire the resources because he's got time in spades, right? I mean, think about that. I mean, when we were 32, we thought we were grown, and now be honest, right? We look at 32-year-olds and think, I can squash you like a bug, right? I mean, you're like, who? I even told him yesterday, I said, you do know your prefrontal, cortex is not fully developed yet, right? But, if he can understand that, he has so much time on his hands in the sense of in 8 years, he's only 30, right? And I want him to be a beast, right? I want him to be, this is kind of that Jordan Peterson stuff and everything like that, right? I want him.
He's good, by the way.
He's awesome, right? Yeah. One of the things he says is, and this is what I want for my son-in-law, for all these men that Mick Miller that I'm going out to see, one of the sayings is, I'd rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. And I want these men to be beasts in the sense of, they can control their own destiny. They can influence others for positive. They can give back. They can contribute. They can pour into others because you can't pour into others if you don't have, if you're not, prepared. And so that's what I want for these guys long term.
Yeah. I'm really big on men leading, there's so many, the divorce rate in America right now is 50%, and there's so many mothers that have had to raise men because the father hasn't been there. And, we want to blame the government. We want to blame problems, point the finger. But at the end of the day, it's men aren't leading.
Men aren't leading. And I am, I am one that I do believe there are God-given gender roles. And a thing, that is so true to me is, remember, what did I tell you? Give me a kid when they were how old?
Yeah, 13.
13.
Yeah.
Women are better equipped to turn babies into boys. And men are better at turning boys into men.
Yeah.
Right? I truly believe that, right? You give me a 2-year-old, I don't know, what do you want to do with this? But you give me the 13-year-old boy, I'll help you make him a man.
Yeah.
Right? It's just, I do believe that is the way God designed it.
Yeah.
And so, I just, the Raymond Project has, in my opinion, been a success, right? He's going to graduate, I guess, for lack of a better word. We're going to do a dinner, in a couple of weeks here, and we're inviting all the men that he visited with and sat with and everything like that. But they were just one of the guys who's in private equity. He took him to Birmingham for a day and went and showed him his companies over there, and they met with the CEOs and the people he's meeting and seeing that ambition can be a positive thing. It's not a greedy thing, right? And that these men are helping him develop his faith as well as his professional acumen, right? My wife thinks we ought to write a book, right? And every dad that has a daughter, I'm looking at you.
I'm sending them your way. You already said you would do it.
I will. I will sit with any young man.
We talk about
at Dinglewood
duplication all the time. You need to duplicate this. Is everybody going to have the resources to be able to do it like you've done it? No, but there's a way you can duplicate this.
It doesn't take money to do it, right? It takes commitment to do it. And if you go and put this out in your community, you would be amazed, just like I was, at the men who will respond.
Yeah.
Right? You want what? You want me to teach your 22-year-old? And so I would tell the men, I said, I just need you to do 2 things with this guy. When you have Raymond for the day or a couple of days, number 1, I want you to show him how your business works. How does it work from the ground up? How is it profitable? How does it work? Why are you passionate about it? Everything like that. And then number 2, if you had your 22-year-old self in the room for the day, what would you tell him?
What would you tell him?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Those would be the 2 things I would tell the men. Show him your business, tell him why you're passionate about it, how does it work? And then tell him if you had your 22-year-old self in the room, what would you say? And these guys have stepped up.
Yeah, you need to write a book. Yeah, that's
so I'm
really
a math
good.
guy, not an English guy. That's why I married an English teacher. So I'm not a writer. So I need a ghostwriter. That's what I need.
You can get on the mic and talk. And
I can get on the mic and talk. We've all learned that.
Yeah,
That's exactly right. Well, Nick said something about duplication, and that's one of the 4 ways that you believe to accumulate the wealth.
Absolutely. That's the only way to accumulate wealth is duplication.
So what are the other ones? Because we talked about that, and it's starting a business. If someone's out there, they're an entrepreneur, explain the difference. We talked about distribution and duplication and really scaling their business.
Okay. So, when it comes to business, I think there are 4 paths to wealth. And so I still do this talk from time to time for different organizations, right? Insurance, otherwise. And I called it the origins of wealth. Again, this is just Tripp Amos's worldview, right? There's no science behind this, but no one stumped me, like I said. But there are only 4 ways to get wealthy, right? Distribution, leverage, royalty, inheritance. That's it. And what I tell people is if I gave you $1 million today and you earn 10% on your money every year, okay, well, that means next year you have 1.1 million. That means in 2 years you have 1.21 million. Okay, but you're also 2 years closer to death. How do you get that 1 million to become 100 million? Right? And the only way is using one of the 4 origins of wealth, right? Distribution, leverage, royalty, and inheritance. And what those 4 things do is they are the only way to duplicate yourself. And you look at every business out there that is successful, and they subscribe to one of those, right? We look at the easy ones, right? The easy ones on distribution, Walmart, Dollar General. We even talked about Microsoft, right? Not being technology, being distribution. So you can look, Amazon, right? They're a distribution play. That's the origin of wealth that they use. Leverage, right? Where's that used? That's in banking. That's in real estate. No one can afford their house if they actually, most people, if they actually had to pay cash for their house, if they didn't use the origin of wealth of leverage, putting 20% down, borrowing the rest, we'd all be living in, 1 bedroom, manufactured housing, right? And that's what we'd be doing. And then royalty, right? So, my example there is it's Disney, it's Marvel. Right, it's
the music industry,
right? But I mean, Marvel Comics hasn't made a successful new, superhero in 70 years. But you want to put Spider-Man on underoos? Give me money, right? I mean, that's how Disney. I mean, so royalty, and then inheritance, right, is a different animal a little bit. But again, if you can't, and I tell people, whatever you do in life, go find a career that you can leverage as many of those 4 as possible. And where I really constructed it was in the insurance realm, right? Because we have all of those, but you duplicate yourself through distribution, through geography, inheritance is through the generations, right? Royalties is through time, right? Because you only have so much time, right? In a day. I have no idea how Elon Musk, runs 4 companies, but he does. But at some point, even he hits a max. Right. And you've got to have other ways to make money while you sleep and even while you're doing something different. And those are the only 4 ways I know how to do it.
Tripp, this has been good.
Thank y'all for having me.
Good.
Oh yeah. So you're coming back though, just so you know.
Rock and roll.
So what's Tripp Amos doing right now?
What is Tripp Amos doing right now? So I do consulting with Aflac.
Okay.
I love my company. I love Aflac. I love what we do. I love the culture. That's really one of my key roles is kind of maintaining the culture that Aflac has, not only in headquarters but throughout the distribution system. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, there is an Aflac Nation out there. Number 2, I am an entrepreneur in residence at Georgia Tech. They have a technology development incubator, right, for tech startups in Atlanta, but throughout Georgia. And so I help coach and mentor those CEOs of those tech startups. I love that because I love the coaching and mentoring part. But what I get is I get to stay on top of what the new emerging technologies are, right? I mean, you still got to educate yourself at 52. So I love doing that. Third, best job right now is empty nester. Is a fantastic job.
So that's a good thing.
That's
right?
a good thing.
Okay.
It is.
I got 5 kids, so we don't know if we're coming or going half the time.
And I only had 2, and so I can't imagine having 5 kids. I can't imagine what that schedule looks like. But my wife and I, we have time that we didn't have.
Yeah.
Right. We have time that we didn't have, so it's great. And but it allows us to have a lot of fun, right? I used to work a lot harder than I do now. And truthfully, that's one of the things I've told Raymond, right? You either pay now or pay later.
Yeah, choose
right?
your hard.
Right? I mean, look at health, right? Either you can work out now and pay for it now, or you can have bad health later on in life and pay later. And so I told him, right, you can either pay now and work your butt off now, or you can pay later and be 40 years old and broke.
That's right.
Right? Because you didn't plant those seeds. So now I'm playing a little bit more. I'm working a little bit less. Allows me to do things like, podcasts with friends. But those are kind of my things right now, right? So as I told you, I'm going to a Raiders game this weekend and an Aerosmith concert. And, it's a good life.
We can't thank you enough.
I so appreciate being here to both of
good,
y'all.
man.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Jonathan.
been
Thank
good.
you both.